Good afternoon. It's wonderful to see so many of you joining us here today. Welcome to our third TEQSA Talks webinar and the final one for this year, for 2025. My name is Julie Pearce and I'm a new face for most of you and the Director of Communications and Engagement here at TEQSA. I'll be your host today. So today I'm delighted to be joined by CEO Dr. Mary Russell, Chief Commissioner Professor Kerri-Lee Krause, Executive Director Ms. Jen Bahen, and Acting Director of the Higher Education Integrity Unit, Dr. Lenka Ucnik. Our speakers today will also form our panel to answer your questions at the end of today's session. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge country. In the spirit of reconciliation, TEQSA acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Our TEQSA office is located on the traditional land of the Wurundjeri people, part of the Kulin Nation. So our agenda for TEQSA Talks today is as follows. We'll have Mary Russell open by speaking to TEQSA's focus on governance and the criticality of effective change management. Kerri-Lee Krause will then speak to TEQSA's forthcoming statement of regulatory expectations on student complaints and grievances. Jen Bahen will provide us with an update, including the imminent launch of the dual sector strategy for consultation and an early childhood education and training sector alert, amongst other updates. And Lenka Ucnik will share some work that is underway in a new resource that will be shared for consultation about three main approaches to enacting assessment reform in a time of artificial intelligence. Following her update, Dr. Ucnik will move to a moderated question and answer session. So the panel for our Q&A will include all the speakers that you'll be hearing from today. As with previous TEQSA Talk seminars, we've set aside some time for Q&A before the closing session. In submitting your questions, please use the dedicated Q&A function in Zoom. Questions will come through to us to be posed to the panellists for their response during the Q&A session. You can start posing questions at any time. And if for any reason you cannot access the Q&A function in Zoom, submit your question to the following email address, comms@teqsa.gov.au. That should be on your screen, but in case you missed it, it's comms@teqsa.gov.au. Please note that this webinar will be recorded and uploaded to TEQSA's website early next week. I'll now hand over to our CEO, Dr. Mary Russell.
Thank you, Julie, and good afternoon, everyone. Before I begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of these webinars this year. They've grown over time to become a valued and really direct channel for us to talk to the sector as a whole, and it's enabled us to deliver timely regulatory updates and messages from our senior leaders. But of course, that only works because you attend and participate. As Julie mentioned, this is our last TEQSA Talks for 2025. I see that we have many hundreds of attendees online today, and I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us. So for my update today, I want to draw your attention to TEQSA's focus on provider governance and the concerns we're seeing in the sector with some restructure and change processes at a number of universities in particular, although much of this is going to be relevant to the sector as a whole. There's change happening right across our higher education sector at the moment, and it's reasonable to expect that this is going to continue for some time. Many providers, public and private, have been considering their business models, changes in demand for courses, changes in student profiles, new opportunities for income streams, and how they might need to change and adapt. TEQSA has received a high number of concerns about some of these change processes across a number of providers, but especially at universities. We know that change processes are ongoing, and I want to spend a few moments discussing the scope of TEQSA's role and how we respond to some of the issues that arise. We understand, and we hear from people who are contacting us, that some of the change taking place impacts areas of teaching and research that staff and students are deeply committed to and often have been over a long period. We also see that change processes and restructures are casting uncertainty on their future plans and in many cases on job certainty. These impacts on staff and students are really significant and need to be managed with appropriate consideration, accountability and care in any restructure or change process. The higher education standards anticipate that providers will need to change. The standards explicitly require providers to ensure the viability of the entity and its business model and to manage material risks. So the existence of organisational or operational change is not of itself a breach of the standards. However, other requirements of the threshold standards are relevant to the way change is planned and implemented. The standards also note that providers must comply with the legislation under which they're established and other applicable legislation. For organisational change, this may include work health and safety obligations, the Fair Work Act, and a provider's own enterprise agreement. There are other agencies that have primary responsibility for alleged breaches of these acts and have specific powers to respond. So when TEQSA receives concerns about alleged breaches of other acts, we will typically refer the matter to the relevant agency. Section 6 of the Threshold Standards sets out a range of governance and accountability obligations, and a provider's approach to planning and implementing change should ensure that these are being met. So this may include accessing advice to inform decision making, consideration of the organisation's objectives and of sustaining quality of higher education that is offered. Very importantly though, the threshold standards also set clear expectations about obligations to students and staff. So relevant considerations for change, including providing accurate and timely information and adequate notice of change to students to enable them to make informed decisions, and also facilitating access to support services. Academic governance arrangements must monitor and assure responses to potential risks, including those that arise from change. There are relevant requirements to ensure sufficient staffing for courses and for student support. The standards do not set ratios or impose specific models for these aspects, but they do require providers to attend to them. Section 2.3 of the standard also sets out requirements relating to student wellbeing and safety, including timely and accurate advice and access to personal support services. Of course, access to academic advice will also be important to those impacted by change. Other sections of the standards that I haven't covered today will of course apply depending on the type of change being contemplated or implemented. Obligations to staff and management of the impacts on staff is, as I said earlier, typically covered by enterprise agreements and other relevant legislation. So TEQSA's understanding of the change that is happening in universities comes from a variety of sources. These include individual complaints that are lodged with us, testimony that we've heard in public hearings in the Senate inquiry into the quality of governance at Australian higher education providers, material change information that we receive from providers, discussion with unions and other public commentary. TEQSA's working on some instances of change management process where governing bodies and leadership teams have fallen short of expectations, but I'm not going to speak about individual providers today. There are some emerging themes about what is going poorly in some change processes and some examples of things that are contributing to better change. I want to share with you now some of the characteristics of change that is progressing better. This is not prescriptive guidance from TEQSA, but it's a timely chance to call out good practice to help inform the work of all providers engaging with change. So firstly, a clear and transparent case for why change is necessary is helping some university communities to engage with the process. A change case that is anchored in the university's objectives and commitment to teaching and research quality, alongside considerations of financial viability, also resonates with a university's shared mission. Clear and early assessment of change impact, especially on staff and students, ensures that these can be properly considered and built into change management. Opportunity and time for staff and students to have meaningful input through consultation is resulting in better change in some universities. It's also important to make sure that you have channels for people to raise concerns, including those who may wish to do that anonymously, and that these are monitored and responded to in meaningful ways. Governing bodies and university executives have key accountabilities for successful management of change. Close and considered engagement of governing bodies in not only the change case, but also holistic consideration of change impact, the development and implementation of change, seems to be essential in fulfilling their obligations under the threshold standards, but also in maintaining trust. The implications and impacts of change for students and staff can be very significant. Anticipating and acknowledging these, along with engaging effectively and supporting those affected, can be very significant in influencing the impact on the individuals involved, as well as trust and wellbeing in the university community. I want to emphasise that the considerations I've outlined today for managing restructures and organisational change are not prescriptive. However, they do reflect obligations in the threshold standards, as well as responsibilities in many enterprise agreements. So they're well worth your consideration. So where to from here? As I said, the points I've raised and shared with you here reflect both concerns raised with us and points from more successful change processes. TEQSA is receiving a range of concerns in the context of organisational restructures and change. Some of these are really broad questions about the need for change or specific aspects of change decisions. These often don't map to potential breaches of the threshold standards, and in many cases are out of scope for us. Others relate to very specific statements or issues. In many instances, these could be responded to by the university if channels for feedback are effective. So TEQSA considers all concerns raised with us, but not all will result in a compliance response. However, even when we may not pursue a specific concern raised with us, it's considered by us as part of our regulatory intelligence about what is happening with a provider. Where there's a pattern of concerns that suggest a fundamental issue, this will also inform our next steps. So as I said earlier, some concerns can most effectively be addressed or responded to by other agencies. These are really complex matters, and we'll continue to apply our compliance processes in the usual ways, recognising the significance of these changes and these processes for staff and students. So in coming weeks, TEQSA will publish a sector alert that elaborates some of the issues and obligations that are emerging around governance and management of organisational restructures and change. We'll share this with providers as well as publishing it on our website. And before I finish my remarks, I want to make sure that you also know that the Department of Education is consulting at the moment on possible changes to the TEQSA Act. So this is really important for us, and some of you might recognise that we raised in this context of the Senate inquiry that we feel in some ways our current powers are not fit for purpose. So the Department of Education, not TEQSA, is the agency that is responsible for leading consideration of change to the TEQSA Act. I do want to call out, if you haven't seen it already, that there's a consultation paper inviting views about the future of regulation of the Australian higher education sector, and specifically some potential changes to our Act. So you'll see on screen the email for submitting responses to the department and the deadline, which is Friday 17th of October. So there is still plenty of time to consider the questions and respond. We would particularly like to encourage you. This is not only a consultation where the views of providers matter, but also the views of students and other representative organisations. And we look forward, as do the department, to kind of hearing and understanding your perspective in this. So I will now hand back to Julie for the next section of our TEQSA Talks.
Thank you, Mary. I'm going to now hand over to Professor Kerri-Lee Krause, and she will be offering an update on TEQSA's forthcoming statement of regulatory expectations on student complaints and grievances.
Great. Thank you so much, Julie, and thanks for that really helpful overview of many aspects of our regulatory ecosystem and activity, Mary. Very helpful. We're certainly very live to the fact that we're all working in a rapidly evolving system and environment. And so I want to say a personal thank you to each of you for making time today to be part of this conversation. As Julie mentioned, I'm going to focus in this brief segment on an issue that certainly from my perspective lies at the heart of higher education quality, and that is how we as a sector handle student complaints and grievances as part of our overall commitment to the quality of the student experience in higher education. And we have our forthcoming statement of regulatory expectations on student grievances and complaints. And I just wanted to give you a bit of a heads up on that statement that will be released very shortly, and wanted to also draw your attention to how you can find out more about it when it is released. So the aim of this statement on student grievances and complaints is effectively to drive the necessary change and improvement in student grievances and complaints across the sector, so that our students and the wider community can have confidence that student well-being and safety are indeed at the heart of what we do in the sector. Now, I want to emphasize that a lot of very good work has already taken place. A lot of good practice is evident in the sector, and I want to say thank you to each of you for your contribution thus far. Effectively, what the statement of regulatory expectations does is to consolidate the guidance provided so far and also to articulate very clearly TEQSA's expectations in this regard. Many of you will have been part of the consultation process, and we've certainly listened carefully to the feedback that you have provided. A number of stakeholder groups and individuals, including the National Student Ombudsman, all have had really important feedback. And we've taken our time to consider that and to make sure that the final version of the statement reflects a serious consideration and response to that feedback. So we're almost there. And thank you for your patience as we make sure that all the fine-tuning is done on that important document. Just one important area of feedback we've received, I'll just touch on that today, and that is we certainly heard some concerns about the potential burden that some of the expectations in the draft statement might place on independent or smaller providers. And in particular, there were comments about the areas around staff training for providers and the applicability or lack thereof for certain providers. We've heard those statements, we've heard that feedback, and we've certainly paid attention to concerns about making sure that the statements are applicable right across the sector. And you will see the evidence of our response in that final statement. A few reflections from my perspective on the importance of complaints handling. As I said earlier, effective complaints handling is absolutely central to student well-being. And as we know, that also then builds a sense of trust and integrity, and a sense of belief that our Australian higher education sector is indeed committed to students and their concerns, to listening very carefully. And also, as I mentioned, much good work is already in train. Our focus now is to make sure that that good practice is implemented consistently right across the sector. So this statement will ensure that those expectations are clear and that we are looking for evidence of consistency of implementation. In the statement, you will find a set of core principles, and they include the fact that complaints and grievance processes need to be fair, transparent, accessible, timely, all principles that you're well familiar with. So we've made sure that those are well and truly embedded in the statement. These are not optional extras. These are absolutely core and foundational to quality practice and a quality student experience. The statement of regulatory expectations, when you receive it, you'll also see that it emphasises the importance of using complaints data effectively and making sure that our systems are robust, that providers have those really robust systems right across the institution. We want to make sure that providers are drawing on data effectively to identify patterns, to look at underlying causes, and thereby to improve the support for students and also to improve governance in regard to monitoring activity. In my role as chair of the Commission, my responsibility with my fellow commissioners is to ensure that our conversations are careful, considered, focused on student well-being. So we'll certainly be making reference to the SRE, as we call it. The SRE helps us to identify what are the core elements of quality assurance that we're looking for in relation to evidence of effective practice, in relation to addressing, managing student grievances and complaints. So a final comment here in terms of the statement of regulatory expectations. It is not about adding further unnecessary regulatory burden. This is really, as I mentioned earlier, about ensuring that we build sector-wide capability and consistency in this critically important area of complaints management. And we'll be wanting to see evidence that you are drawing on those statements of regulatory expectations and providing evidence of ways in which you're addressing them. TEQSA will continue to work with you right across the sector as we finalise the statement, and we want to make sure that it's as practical as possible, proportionate, supportive. So what's next? How will you find out about when it's released? We will be sure to make contact with each provider via email when the statement is published, when it's available. We'll also ensure that it's on the website, so you'll be certain to know when it's available. And when it is published, I strongly encourage you to take a close look at those expectations and test your current practice against them. You will find that many areas may already be covered off, which is great, but make sure that you are confident that you're able to test yourself against those expectations and honestly assess where there might be areas for improvement. I'll stop there now, and I'm going to encourage you again, if you have questions about the SRE, don't hesitate to use the Q&A function. And I'm going to hand over now to Ms. Jen Bahen, and she is our Executive Director of Regulatory Operations, and I'll do that through Julie. Thanks, Julie.
Lovely. Thank you, Kerri-Lee. And we look forward to sharing the statement more broadly soon. So yes, Kerri-Lee, as you mentioned, I'll now hand over to Jen Bahen, who'll provide an update on regulatory operations and much more. Over to you, Jen.
Thank you, both Kerri-Lee and Julie, and of course Mary. It's wonderful to be back with you all today in the last TEQSA Talks webinar for this year, which is hard to believe, but of course we'll have our conference as a major connection point very soon. I'd like to update you on three things within my area, and I'm going to save a little surprise for the end as well. So I'd like to update you on the joint dual sector strategy that we are working on with ASQA, cover or continue our conversation on emerging risks in the early childhood education sector, and then do some rapid fire updates on some operational matters on behalf of the wonderful team that I work with. So in very exciting news, TEQSA and ASQA will jointly release our dual sector regulatory strategy tomorrow. The strategy responds directly to the Australian Universities Accord final report. ASQA and TEQSA share 57 dual sector providers, those delivering, of course, both vocational education and training and higher education. And there's obviously a need to reduce duplication and streamline regulation for them. This work is just one piece of the government's broader strategy to support dual sector providers and greater tertiary harmonisation. And it looks very specifically at the practical, implementable changes that TEQSA and ASQA can together make now for dual sector providers. This strategy outlines 3 opportunities that this work will be focused on. Better facilitating information sharing and collaboration in key areas. Where practical, optimising the alignment of evidence requirements for similar assessments while maintaining regulatory effectiveness, and supporting dual sector providers to mature corporate and academic governance, which is a slightly longer term opportunity. I hope this reflects that we share a commitment with ASQA to reduce the administrative burden and compliance duplication for providers, and it's been a wonderful project to work on with our colleagues from ASQA. In terms of next steps, the strategy has been endorsed by Minister Clare and Minister Giles. Implementation of the strategy is already underway, and we started with a briefing for key peak bodies just this morning. Our respective websites will be updated as we move forward with delivering this project, and we look forward to engaging with the dual sector provider cohort during the implementation to test ideas and see that things will work for you. For those of you who attended our last TEQSA Talks, you'll recall that I gave an update on the emerging risk in regard to early childhood education courses. TEQSA and ASQA continue to observe emerging risks around workplace learning, especially in early childhood education. We have received more complaints and concerns indicating that there may be a broader systemic issue around assuring genuine students, academic standards and workplace learning. Together, our agencies take seriously any emerging risks in this area, and for this reason, we are progressing many elements of our work together. With this in mind, we want to be ensured that providers are managing the following risks. That admitted students not being genuine and prepared for their courses, education agents or third-party providers recruiting students who do not meet course admission standards or entry requirements, large changes in enrolment practices into some courses, students not having high-quality work placements and support systems to support their learning, and the integrity of some providers' assessment activities, to name a few. And of course, as you would be aware, if you're enrolling international students, there are additional responsibilities set out in the ESOS legislation and national code. Providers, of course, through this are responsible for ensuring that education agents acting on their behalf are acting ethically and with the best interests of students. And I would call out this particular risk as a number of complaints have been received in this area. It is incumbent on all providers and your governing bodies to be attuned to these issues and risks as a priority. I flagged at the last TEQSA Talks that we have convened a regulatory response group to help our response to this issue, and we continue to coordinate. We have contacted individual providers with the highest risk indicators, and we are likely to contact a second tranche of providers in coming months. So this is a call to action to have your house in order. We are also given heightened attention to all course accreditation and re-accreditation applications in early childhood, including carefully reviewing the adequacy and availability of placements and placement policies. Early childhood staff play a critical role in the development and education of Australia's children. It is important that their work is underpinned by education and training that ensures they are appropriately skilled and assessed to deliver high quality and safe care. I'd now like to move through a couple of operational issues that might help support some of the submissions that you make to TEQSA, both in relation to applications and also responses to compliance processes. Firstly, I want to thank all providers for working with our regulatory team so collegiately and patiently. It is our intention in almost all circumstances to work as closely as we can with providers to bring different submission types and matters through to a conclusion. I'd also like to publicly thank our TEQSA teams for continuing to approach their work in this way. We feel very lucky. For the last TEQSA Talks of 2025, I thought we might take the opportunity to look at some of the common issues we see with applications or submissions, which can often delay or complicate that submission. What I'm about to work through may seem like a list of things to do better, but that's absolutely not how we think about it. We see some very good applications and submissions. But these are things that you can think about ahead of a submission or an application to help support a smoother path. As many of you are aware, TEQSA is committed to a self-assurance model of regulation. We moved to the submission of self-assurance statements in re-registration almost 2 years ago, and we are now implementing self-assurance-based applications in Krause and course accreditation, as well as in some compliance process requests. A self-assurance statement is the opportunity to own your own risks. We ask that you please be open and transparent. We know the sector isn't without risk. Own your challenges, explain how you have mitigated risk, improved oversight, and are monitoring the effectiveness of these measures. Across all application and submission types, it does provide greater reassurance to the TEQSA teams when the applicant can self-identify the risks and concerns they hold, their ongoing steps to manage and mitigate those, rather than a claim that there are no risks or concerns at all. Your self-assurance statements should also include demonstrating how the corporate governing body, regardless of type, assures itself that risks have been identified and material risks are being managed and mitigated effectively. Quite specifically, for the movement to self-assurance for course accreditation and re-accreditation, we have issued new application guides to help you. We also wrote to all impacted providers, so that is providers who are not self-accrediting status, on the 3rd of September to draw your attention to these guides and to flag the new evidence requirements. We know that was only a short time ago, but we're still receiving applications using old application and evidence guides. We do know it takes time to embed a new process, but we would be grateful you take a look at both our correspondence and our website to update yourselves on new requirements. We're pleased to say that in most cases, the evidence requirements are more streamlined, so it should help you as well. Please do reach out on this matter if you need any additional information. There's a contact mailbox in the correspondence we sent out, or you can reach out through our inquiries team. We're also seeing this in some Krause and ESOS self-assurance applications where providers seem to be making submissions based on an older set of requirements. The new requirements, especially for change of capacity or change of location, were published on the website at the end of last year, and our team's happy to help you find them. Again, the process should be a more streamlined one. One other thematic that we note across a number of applications or submissions is when the content isn't fit for purpose or a key issue hasn't been properly examined. For example, in ESOS and Krause applications to change capacity or change location, we are seeing some submissions that don't actually seem to address the issue at hand. That is, there's lots of evidence not relevant to the change request and not enough evidence to directly support your change request. The message in that is, make your application specific and fit for purpose. We see the same in some course applications, where it is critical to address the issues of most relevance to a course accreditation or re-accreditation application, namely staff capability, professional accreditation requirements, and managing the risks associated with different delivery models. We also see this in compliance process responses or re-registration applications where a provider has engaged an external reviewer, very often in relation to governance, but there isn't a clear explanation of which recommendations have been taken up from that external report, why and why certain recommendations haven't been adopted. A couple of other common issues to flag before I unveil my surprise. If you're submitting a material change notification for the appointment of a CEO or a board member, a reminder that this needs to be accompanied by a fit and proper persons declaration. And then separately, the most common issue we see in initial registration applications is that of readiness, especially in relation to rushed applications for whatever reason. We know there's lots of pressures out there. Our team is very happy to talk to providers ahead of submissions to be clear about our requirements, and we urge you not to rush your applications. Now for my final surprise, which is probably an anticlimax, but I hope it kept you listening throughout this session. I would like to foreshadow what for us will be a very exciting moment, and I promise you regulators do get excited. We've been working very hard internally at a draft of a refreshed regulatory strategy with a strong focus on risk-based regulation. We will launch drafts of the major components of our renewed regulatory strategy at the TEQSA conference in November in a workshop on the Thursday after the main conference. That workshop will serve as a starting point for our consultation on the draft, and invitations will be issued to providers for this workshop shortly. And we hope we can accommodate as many of you as possible. And we look forward to talking to you about our refreshed regulatory approach. That's it. I will hand back to Julie. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. That was a great surprise. Wonderful. So next up, we're going to hear from Acting Director of Higher Education Integrity Unit, or HEIU, Dr. Lenka Ucnik. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Julie. It's lovely to be here again today, and I'm here to give you a couple of updates on some work that we've been doing. One is just to talk about some Gen AI self-assurance workshops that we ran last month, and the other one is to launch a new resource which was published today and to tell you a little bit more about it. So firstly, I just want to say that thank you to all of the providers who registered last month to one of our 8 half-day Gen AI self-assurance workshops. It was really heartening to see the positive response. All workshops were filled up, and for the most part, all providers attended on the day, which was wonderful. I'd also like to extend my thanks to Professor Kath Ellis, who developed the content of the workshop and also facilitated some of the sessions, and also Professor Tara Magdalensky, who helped in putting all the resources and content together and also facilitated a majority of the workshops. If any providers who attended the session or missed out have any questions, please email the Integrity Unit and we will be more than happy to help. However, the reason I'm actually here today is to tell you about the launch of our new resource, Enacting Assessment Reform in a Time of Artificial Intelligence. This resource was developed by Professor Jason Lodge and co-led with Professor Phil Dawson and Professor Margaret Bierman, along with a group of other teaching and assessment and design experts, also some practitioners, as well as some AI experts. This resource is a companion piece to the 2023 assessment reform principles that we published. And the best way that I kind of think about this resource is where the original resource was kind of a compass to provide some guidance on how providers should be thinking about assessment reform. This is really providing several maps on how different institutions have actually now been putting these principles and propositions into practice. Before I move on to show you the content of the resource, which I think is probably the most interesting part, I'd just like to say that a link to the resource will be put into the chat, so please go and visit the site to see the resource for yourself. Finally, I just want to say before I move on to, actually I'll move on, you can see it now, but I wanted to tell you that basically as the technology is continually evolving and adapting and becoming more sophisticated, as students are actually becoming increasingly proficient users, and as professionals and workplaces are embedding AI into their kind of everyday practices, it's really pressing for institutions to really look at their traditional forms of assessment, both to make sure that students are genuinely achieving the learning outcomes of their degree, but also to ensure that your graduates are effective and ethical users of this technology and really prepared for a world where this is going to be ubiquitous. So to support institutions, assist teaching and learning leaders, support academic and professional staff, this resource presents 3 kind of dominant pathways that different institutions have taken to implementing some of the principles and propositions in the original resource. So the first pathway is really the programmatic assessment one that was presented in the original resource. And I won't read the text there because I'm sure you can read for yourself. The second pathway is really about securing assessment and learning outcomes in accordance to the unit or subject. And the third pathway is sort of a hybrid of the two, which many institutions are also taking because as many of you out there are aware, not every single course or unit is designed to work that well with programmatic assessment. So these are the 3 pathways. And now each section in the resource is presented in a similar way. So we describe what the pathway is, and then there's also some sort of key characteristics of the pathway that are presented for each section. So this is, you can see pathway 1 here, which is the programmatica section. Then also, one of the things that I think is really, really useful in this resource is that there are some descriptions of really the opportunities that that pathway presents, and also the challenges that this pathway presents, because just like anything in life, nothing is perfect and everything has its pros and cons. But the reason this is presented is that providers can look at these pathways and reflect on how they're implementing their own assessment reform practices, and to sort of really think about some of the challenges that they may face and kind of understand that they're not alone, and have a look at some of the ways that you can mitigate those. In addition to this, after the 3 pathways, the resource also presents 3 additional sections. There is one short section which is just describing some of the ongoing challenges that I think institutions are still facing, so that even though we understand that traditional forms of teaching, learning and assessment need to be redesigned and rethought, there are still a lot of considerations and things that need to be implemented to make sure that assessments are valid, that they're also authentic, and that they're actually fit for purpose in a Gen AI world. Then the next part, which I think will be really useful for most providers, is the critical questions. There's about 2 pages worth of these, and they're really just there to kind of get everyone to think about some of the considerations that are necessary when you are making these transformations. And the final one is really just a bit of a call to action about some of the things that we need to think about as we kind of move forward into this ever-evolving and changing landscape. So again, I'd just like to encourage you, please visit the link, download the resource. I hope you'll find it as valuable as the first resource. And that's it for me. Now I'm going to move over into my new role, which is the one about asking questions. So thank you very much. All right, so I'm going to ask the first question, which I'll just send. So this one is about, when will TEQSA be providing more information about the reporting requirements for the Workplace Laws SRE?
I'm happy to do this one. Thank you, Lenka. I'm happy to answer this question, or at least begin the answer to this question. TEQSA is giving very careful consideration to the shape and form of this reporting requirement, beyond it being merely an attestation of whether an institution is compliant or not compliant with the Workplace Obligations SRE. We are very aware that some providers may not be able to say in all good faith that they are compliant with the obligations within the Workplace Laws SRE. And we want to make sure we have a reporting template that enables those providers to indicate the remediation they are currently a part of and the actions that they are taking to make sure that they are then compliant with the SRE. That requires quite a bit of careful thought. I would say we are reasonably close to having something that we can take through to approval. I am loath to put an exact timeframe on it, because I do understand that might prompt lots of people to then ask me on that exact date as to when it will be available. But I would say at least this side of our conference, if not earlier, we will have that available for you. I think the next question, and if I can preempt a question, the next question may be, how long will you have to respond? We certainly want to be fair in the length of time that we give you, and we're also very mindful that this type of attestation and report requires consideration by your governing bodies, oversight and consideration by your governing bodies. We want to make sure that we give you enough time to do that, but we also anticipate that much of what we'd be asking for is information that you already have available to us. We're also mindful that particularly in higher education space, we butt up against some folk taking leave and having councils not meet at certain times. I want to reassure you we're taking all of that into consideration with the timeframe, and we'll release the timeframe at the time we release the reporting requirements as well. I'll just check there's nothing anyone else wants to add.
Perhaps if I can just add that, you know, while we know that some of the changes that might need to be made to meet all of those expectations, some of them are easier to implement. Many of them are things you will have implemented already. Some of them are quicker and easier to implement, and there are others such as refresh of very dated HR systems, for example, that might need a longer period of time and significant investment. What we are looking for is not only the action plans, but a very reasonable time frame that clearly maps out the actions that are going to be taken in the short to medium term and the deliverables that you're expecting to get to the point where you are meeting your obligations and you have that level of confidence and staff can have that trust that the systems and processes have been put in place to meet your obligations. So, I guess it's we're expecting a level of detail that reflects good faith commitment and engagement with rectifying things that need to be fixed.
Okay, before I move on to the next question, I can see in the questions here that some people are finding it difficult to find the link to the resource that I spoke about. I believe that is because it's coming through the chat, the Q&A function. I can see it also coming up in my stream. So if you have a look in the questions that are posed in the Q&A function, you'll also see the link in there rather than the chat. So I apologise for that. So the next question that I'm going to ask will most likely be directed to Jen again. So we were given an expected outcome date for our re-registration, but it has already passed. Could you advise on next steps?
Yeah, and I don't want to go to individual provider matters, but there's a number of reasons why it may take longer. It may be that some of the other re-registration applications that were already in consideration ahead of yours, I don't want to imply that there's a queue, but ahead of yours, were more complex than we had thought or required additional information for providers, or we needed to consider it in ways that took more time. So that could be one of the reasons that the date has already passed. There are other reasons itself that, including consideration of your own application. In terms of finding out where yours is up to, we do encourage you to reach out to our inquiries team who can help work with the re-registration team for you. We don't necessarily encourage you to bombard the registration team for re-registration applications that haven't yet passed. We want that team focused as much as they can on reviewing applications, but in this sort of circumstance and in lots of other circumstances, we absolutely encourage you to reach out to our inquiries team. I would say certainly in re-registration, we are at the tail end of managing the peak that the COVID pause on re-registration applications occurred for TEQSA, and we thank you for your patience as we work through the tail end of those assessments. We are nearing the end of those assessments, but we're not quite there yet.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to now, just the questions moved. So in May, TEQSA flagged they'd be moving to a regulatory-led approach in 2026. Are there any further details around this, and what does it mean?
So I'm going to guess that is actually referring to a kind of maturing our risk-based approach to regulation. So there's a couple of pieces of work that are really important that we've been progressing in the background. At last year's conference, many of you would have participated in a workshop that we did to get provider input into revising our risk framework. So that's really about saying, look, how do we identify and understand risk as it applies in higher education delivery? What are the key areas of focus? How will they be picked up and reflected in our regulatory assessment work, but also in things that you should concentrate on as providers? So that piece of work is substantially progressed, and we look forward to sharing that soon for your further sort of feedback and to talk to you about how that will be incorporated in our ways of delivering our work. That is one key part of our regulatory strategy, which is in essence the way that we want to go about maturing and delivering our regulation. So, as you know, TEQSA has obligations to regulate in ways that are based on risk and necessity and proportionality. We can never be static in the way that we do that. We have to continue to adapt our regulatory approach to reflect what's happening in the environment and the reasonable expectations that providers and the community have of us. So we are entering the next phase of that. One of the key elements of that will be talking with you about how we're going to increase our focus on sector risk and essentially look to make sure that we can both respond to our obligations for assessing and assuring the operations of individual providers, but also monitoring the types of risks that affect the sector as a whole, sharing relevant information about those risks and relevant guidance with the sector, and so that you can act on those and manage those risks effectively for your operations, your students and your staff. And then how we will be picking that up in our compliance work to look at making sure that the responses to those risks are sufficient across the sector. So you can probably see that a lot about that approach echoes what we've learned out of the work of the Integrity Unit over preceding years. So that's, I guess, a flavour of some of the things that we will share with you as we launch the regulatory strategy about how we'll develop this next sort of stage of our regulatory work. There will be other elements that we'll articulate there, and at the moment what we're doing is working out what are the kind of the key pieces of that work that we can bring to our workshop after the conference. I'll be talking in the conference about this, the reg strategy as a whole, and Jen and her team, with support from the rest of us, will be facilitating the workshop after the conference to bring some of the key pieces of that to you for your input, for your advice about how that might land in the sector, what it will mean for you, you know, what might be difficult, so that we can craft that with really good consultation and input from you. There will be other opportunities as we roll this out over time, but those are the types of things that you can expect. So it is, I guess, another reason that if you're still sitting on the fence about coming to the conference, it is an important opportunity to have input into how we interpret our role and our work and how we apply that in the ways that we work with you in the sector.
All right, thank you very much, Mary. Before I move on to the next question, I'd just like to say it's good to see people have found the link in the chat after a flurry of where is the link messages, but hopefully it's there now for all to see. The next question that I'm going to ask is around the progress of the T&E toolkit. So when will the new T&E toolkit come out?
Yeah. We actually have this question in various forms multiple times in the chat, and as someone who is an absolute lover of transnational education, I'm thrilled to see it and really excited that you're excited about the refreshed T&E toolkit. We are, anyone who kind of reads international education news would see, that we are seeing a number of risks within transnational education, particularly as we see new models for delivery and new markets opened up, and wanting to ensure that there is the right governance and oversight of T&E activities in Australia. So we've taken some additional time to ensure that T&E toolkit calls out really practical ways for you to look at those risks and think about mitigating those risks, including some additional consultation with some practitioners and experts working in the sector. That's where it's at right now. We anticipate that feedback coming back, I think it's towards the end of next week or early the next week, and then we can look at refreshing a final version of the T&E toolkit for release this calendar year. Yeah, that's it.
All right, thank you very much, Jen. There seems to be a bit of a desert of questions right now. So if anyone would like to get in quickly to ask the final question, that'd be wonderful. Otherwise, if nothing comes in, I will wrap up this Q&A and then pass over. Oh, something's come in. Exciting. Okay, I'll send this through, and then this will be our final question. So, understanding that there will be risks with responses required that come up during the year as identified, is there a 2026 plan for regulatory requirements for the providers whose requirements are now known?
I could have a go at compliance priorities might be.
And process changes.
Yeah. Do you want to go? And I'll finish.
Okay, so I'm going to guess a little bit about what sits behind that question. So when we're talking about the change that we're making, obviously we know that you work to a lead time often in preparing for things like re-registration assessments, certain types of applications that you make to us. So we are not going to suddenly say, yes, we've changed our requirements today and the application that you submitted yesterday has to be redone in a different form. That's not sensible. So we've already been implementing changes to our regulatory processes that reflect this kind of direction of travel. So many of you will have already engaged in preparing self-assurance statements for various types of regulatory processes. We've talked about that at our conference. So there are changes here that will be rolled out gradually, and we will share those with you in a timely way. Where we know that there are providers who have key regulatory dates coming up, we will do what we can to make sure that you're aware of those changes that are coming down the pipeline, so that we can implement changes and you can prepare things in a new format, and we're avoiding any rework. This is not about burdening you, it's about making change, but also to some extent it's about us learning as we go along. Certainly with the self-assurance reports, we learnt a lot by working with providers who made those initial reports as part of their applications in order to fine-tune and tweak them. So there will be change. We will keep sharing information here with you. We will share information about what's coming up or what we're releasing in the regular email updates that we do. Big things like the reg strategy, we value the opportunity to bring those to the conference so that you know what is coming down the pipeline. And if that's relevant to a regulatory activity that you have coming up, discuss that with the team that you're working with. So it's not about sudden surprises and it's not about sudden changes. It's about articulating a strategy that is our direction of travel and that is going to guide particularly our process change and the kind of expectations that we have, but also that you can have of us as we look at ways to mature and do our regulatory work better. I hope that's what you are actually asking.
Thank you very much, Mary. And just to finish off, last question, which I hope is an easy one to answer. So I will send it through, and then after this, I will pass over to our host, Julie, again. So where and when can we register or find further details for the Thursday workshop that will come at the end of the conference? Do you want to do that?
Yes, that is a great question, and in fact one I'd prepared earlier. So we'll share an email inviting both your feedback on today's TEQSA Talks, but also an opportunity to register for TEQSA Talks on the 19th of March 2026, which sounds, this is the Thursday.
This would be after the conference.
My apologies. Okay, I've misread the question.
Yeah. I'm happy to just quickly jump in and note that working with the support of Julie's team, there'll be an email invitation sent to all providers to register a small number of staff. I can't remember whether it's one or two. Two, thank you, Mim. It is 2 staff for the conference. We're just finalising the details of that invitation at the moment, but I think it's almost ready to go. So you should get that in coming days and you'll be able to register for that conference.
All right, fantastic.
And back to Julie.
That's right, back to Julie.
Me, I got excited about promoting the conference. So thank you for your questions. And thank you, Lenka, for moderating, and to our panel for answering those questions. So that does bring us to the end of our final TEQSA Talks for 2025. And as I started saying earlier, we will share an email inviting your feedback and also that opportunity to register for TEQSA Talks next year. And if you haven't already, do make sure that you have registered for the TEQSA conference on the 18th and 19th of November. I understand tickets are selling fast. So thanks again to all of our speakers, so Mary, Kerri-Lee, Jen and Lenka, and to all of you who have joined us for your time today. And a special thank you also to the TEQSA team who brought this seminar together for you. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thanks for having us.